emotions have residue. So like when you feel these big giant emotions and then you go try to interact with people, you're going to feel as though you've just been through that, experience with someone, because you have. As an empathy, the emotions are not false just because they're fiction. They're true, right? And we feel them as though they're true when we're high empathy. And so just knowing how that works, then it helps me to be a better decision maker in my writing career. It helps me to manage my relationships with other people in my life better. It helps me to know why staying off the internet is good for me, why not being on Facebook is good for me, not swimming around in everybody else's emotions all the time when I don't have to is good for me. So like it's powerful.
Welcome to the Stark Reflections on Writing and Publishing podcast. There has never been a better time for writers. More information, options, and opportunities are available to you, but navigating these requires insight. Join Mark Leslie Lefebvre as he draws upon more than a quarter century of experience as a writer, a bookseller, and a trusted book industry consultant to explore and reflect on the writing and publishing landscape to help you make informed choices on your writer journey.
Hello, Reflectives, and welcome to episode 370 of the Stark Reflections podcast. This is your host, Mark Leslie Lefebvre. In today's episode, I have an interview with Becca Syme. Becca is a Gallup-Certified Strengths Coach and has been coaching success alignment for more than a decade. She's the author of the Quit Books for Writers series and the popular Write Better, Faster Academy and courses. She also writes mystery novels in her spare time and lives on one of the 1,000 lakes in Minnesota. Now, parts of this interview are, when you actually look at them, it's really just an open therapy session where Becca's guiding me through an important stream of therapy that I needed after taking the Clifton Strengths and talking about some of those things. But it is a most fascinating interview. Becca is always amazing to talk to. She provides such great insights and reflections and thoughts. It is a phenomenal conversation. I know you're going to get something out of it. Of course, me saying I know you're going to get something out of it is something you should question. And I love how Becca reminds us of the importance of questioning those things. But that's all coming up later in this episode. First, why don't we pause to hear a word from this episode's sponsor.
Ready to elevate your writing career? Join the Cruising Writers Group Sailing the Caribbean from Galveston on February 22nd to March 1st, 2025. This time, we're focused on indie authors, with special guests Mark Leslie and Aaron Wright leading a deep dive into the world of self-publishing. You'll come away with invaluable insights, but also great memories as you connect with other writers and explore charming ports of call in Roatan, Honduras, Costa Maya, Mexico, and Cozumel. Visit cruisingwriters.com to book your spot today.
That's right, this episode is sponsored by Cruising Writers, and I am so thrilled and so honored that I get to be part of Cruising Writers along with Aaron Wright, the founder of Wide for the Wind. So looking forward to that. Going to be an amazing time, and I have heard from folks who are planning on going there, so I look forward to seeing you there in the sun and the fun and all the great things we're going to do related to our writing careers. And a huge shout out and thank you to all of the folks who support this podcast over at patreon.com/starkreflections. Thank you guys so much, as well as those coffee buddies of mine who are supporting the podcast via buymeacoffee.com/Mark Leslie. Really appreciate your support. And now, on to comments from recent episodes. Okay, a couple comments from episode 369, the DIY author with Kaylin Booth. Got a comment over on YouTube from Elizabeth123, who said, "Finally, an author who writes in different genres. I cannot relate to writers of romance book, thrillers, and so forth. I also love how she just tries different things to promote her book/writing. Thank you for that comment, Elizabeth. I'm glad that Kay resonated with you in that way. And it is a frustration I know for authors, because I work with a lot of different authors and I do consultations with different authors, is a lot of the stuff that we see in mainstream indie authorship, that's a weird term, but mainstream indie authorship is coming from those most successful authors, the romance writers and the thriller writers. And part of the reason is because those tend to have the most voracious readers who read way more than anyone else. So it's a slightly different beast. As an author of horror and as an author of books that don't necessarily fall into those categories, I understand what you mean, because every time you see or hear about a strategy, you have to readapt it. Even with my urban fantasy books, for example, I know that my urban fantasy is a little bit different than some of the other ones. I'm not saying that to say it's better. I really wish it I really wish it was not so unique. But I do know that my readership's going to be slightly different than a lot of the really popular urban fantasy titles like that. But that's just something I have to do. I have to adapt. But so glad, Elizabeth, that you left that comment reminding us, or reminding me, I should say, that it's really good for me to bring in authors with a variety of backgrounds, right? So obviously I'm going to bring in romance writers, I'm going to bring in thriller writers, I'm going to bring in writers of contemporary fiction or historical fiction or literary fiction, nonfiction writers as well, because the whole idea is for you and I to learn from our conversations with these various authors. And as a sort of a prelude to what you're going to hear in the interview with Becca, is remembering that not everything's the same for everyone. And so different authors bring different experiences to the table. And I believe that we can learn something unique and something different from every single person. So Elizabeth, thank you for that comment. And over on Twitter/X, Edwin Downward for the very same episode 369, says, the DIY episode of Stark Reflections has me reflecting on how much of my life has been utterly solo with no one to bounce ideas off of. I stumbled so much during that time and only moved forward on writing to publish when I started reaching out. And that can be an important thing, because, Edwin, you probably didn't realize that for the longest time, particularly because us as writers, we tend to want to stay a little bit solo. But like you, I know that I think I've moved forward by connecting with other people and the things that I've learned from other people. And Edwin, I am so glad that you take the time to reach out and let me know your reflections, often on the Twitter sphere, although I have seen your comments come from other places. But that's you paying it forward, isn't it? Sharing your reflections and thoughts, because I'm pretty gosh darn sure that somebody reading your reflections is thinking, is looking at that and potentially learning. And that's what we're all doing together in this business. So thank you guys so much for your comments. You can always leave comments for the podcast over at starkreflections.ca in the show notes. You can tag me on the social medias and share your thoughts, or even the feed over at youtube.com/Mark Leslie Lefebvre. But who wants to spell Mark Leslie Lefebvre? Really? Oh, well, I'm just going to go with it, because that's the name I have, and that's the name I'm known with for my non-fiction stuff. But I do love hearing your comments and your reflections, because it reminds me of the various different things that you might have gotten out of the interview or the conversation than I got out of. And sharing is caring, after all. So that is it for comments. We'll play a quick bumper, and I'll do a short personal update. Yeah, right, Mark. You're going to keep it short. Okay, personal update time. Last weekend, I was at a metaphysical gathering. I have an aunt, Aunt Rita, who is a medium, and she was one of the co-organizers. This was held at Lakeside Gems, and it was near Bancroft, Ontario, probably about a 10-minute drive outside of Bancroft on the highway. Beautiful. Ontario's cottage country, which is a few hours northeast of Toronto, let's say. Just an absolutely exquisite place to be. And Liz came for the weekend with me. I was there Friday and then Saturday and Sunday, And we ended up camping at Silent Lake Provincial Park. She brought Indy, our dog, in a separate car, so I got up there earlier in the day, well, early afternoon, set up. Liz came in later, set up the campsite. We ended up staying at the campsite. It was a much cheaper accommodations than staying in a hotel, and not that there were many hotels in that area. But I got the best of both worlds. I got the power and the love and the passion I get when I'm at my author table and I'm talking to people and I'm selling my books, I'm talking about books and stuff. I do quite enjoy it. The days can be long and so there were some long stretches of time where it was just me sitting there making notes because there was nobody coming through. But there was some really great engagements, and I do love that. I love putting on that author hat and engaging with people talking about books. But I also really love the getting back to nature and camping with Liz. Now, I'm not as much of an outdoors person as she is. She's an amazing outdoors person. But Camp Chili, which we had on the Friday night, and I'm trying to remember the interesting food that we made for Saturday night with the eggs and the bacon and all of the veggies that we had in the cooler. We were just trying to use everything up. We weren't sure if she was coming for one night or two nights, so just sort of brought a weird mishmash. And I had to get going really early in the morning in order to get up, have a shower, and get to the site, etc. But so I did skip out on some of that, get up in the morning, have the camp coffee. I basically only had a couple camp coffees, and the mosquitoes were so bad it wasn't as enjoyable as it normally is. But that being said, there is something truly magical about Liz and I sitting in front of the campfire, just the two of us, and Indy, of course, lying there between us usually, and just talking. And just being in the moment. And that's so important when I think about this interview in this episode with Becca. Yeah, okay, I picked up the phone every once in a while, basically to check in a beer, which I'm kind of anal about doing that. I guess I'm a bit of a completionist when it comes to tracking the new beers that I've had. So it's great when the beers are ones I've had before, so I don't need to check them in. But just being in the moment and just the two of us and talking, I needed that so much. It was so invigorating. And even the sleep that I get when I'm in the fresh outdoors and the fresh air and everything, including a weird incident where we ended up hung the trash up by a tree, and we normally would put it in the trunk of the car, but we ended up thinking it was going to be fine. And of course, something got into it. Probably 2 a.m, wake up and I hear this noise, and I turn on the light and I go out and I'm trying to see what it is. I can't see anything. We suspected it was a raccoon, but then we go back into the tent, and there was a mess of garbage, but it had torn into the garbage bag that was hanging on the tree. I guess it wasn't high enough. And then I'm laying in the tent and I can hear something sniffing just outside the tent where my head is. And I flicked the tent with my finger, like the canvas of the tent, my finger, and you could hear it taking off. And actually, I don't know what it was, but the sound of the sniffing and just the noise that this thing made was so loud and strong that it made me think it might have actually been a bear. And I know bears are timid, so they're not going to hurt people typically. And it didn't sound so much like a raccoon to me. Not that can ever say I've heard a raccoon or a bear sniffing up close, but that was my guess. Anyways, again, not an outdoorsman. For all I know, it was a mouse. No, I know it wasn't a mouse. It was definitely big, and claw marks in the tree and stuff like that where the garbage was. So, in any case, we had a really fun experience. We're going to be camping again for a couple days this coming week because on the 19th, next Friday is when I take off for Western Colorado University, graduating in the publishing, Masters of Publishing program. And then right after that, we're immediately flying to New York to get married, which is going to be a lot of fun. But of course, there's a lot to do. So personal-wise, we still don't have the wedding rings. We still have to get me some suitable clothing for travel. I've got the tux and everything already, but just a whole bunch of little things that we need. Well, obviously the license and stuff like that. All the little things we need to get taken care of are still weighing on me. I've got the huge Kickstarter, well, the huge to me Kickstarter. I'm hoping it's going to be huge. My goals, I'm setting the goal at $1,500 because I just want to help pay for the money I've already invested in the original artwork and other things that I'm doing for One Hand Screaming 20 Haunting Years, which is coming out in the fall, in October. But I've got the Kickstarter needing to go. I just finished with an ad. An advertisement for this book is going into Rue Morgue magazine. I got this wonderful quote from Jonathan Maybury, which I'll read to you now. And Jonathan says, "A wonderfully weird gallop through nightmare country, dark, often hilarious, twisted, and filled with magic." Jonathan Maybury, New York Times bestselling author of Necrotech. And I was just so honored to get that from Jonathan. My friend Kevin Anderson sent me a quote as well recently. I'll be adding that to the back of the book along with Jonathan's. And I got a few other feelers out there for other folks in the industry getting some of those reviews. And always nice when you can get a review from a horror writer. I know Jonathan writes more than horror, but he has written a significant number of amazing horror pieces, and he is very, very knowledgeable in the field. So I've got that going on. I've got some books I'm publishing. So Dave Sweet, who co-authored with Sarah Cades, The Skeletons in My Closet, which is 101 life lessons from a homicide detective. That came out earlier this year. And at the end of the month, I just have in my hands right now, I got a proof copy from the local printer. Got a proof copy of Undaunted, which is book 2 in the series, which he co-authored with Susan Forrest. And this is Dark Tales of Courage witnessed through the eyes of a homicide detective. And that is pretty exciting. The trailer for Unsolved Mysteries is up now for the new season. And Dave, as a retired homicide detective, is one of the guests who appears in one of these episodes talking about one of the cases in this book. So Dave and Susan and I are pretty excited. We will be doing the book launch officially in Calgary, where they're both from, when I'm there in August, on August 15th, for When Words Collide, the conference. And the book does officially release at the end of July. However, we're doing the official in-person book launch when all three of us can be there. I mean, it's more important that Dave and Susan are there, but because I'm going to be in town, decided to schedule it for that time. So we're pretty pumped and stoked about that. On top of that, I'm still working on finishing off a book in hand, nonfiction book for writers. I'm getting up in the morning every day and I'm just continuing to chip away at that because I need to get, I guess, a version of that done so I can get at least an early version out to Joanna Penn, because she's going to have me on the Creative Penn podcast talking about the book. And while she did have an early version, which was about half of the content from the book, I want to be able to send her an updated revised version, because I've got some case studies in there based on real authors that I've worked with and who've let me share their stories and how they're doing certain things. So I want all that stuff to be in the book before I get that off to Joe, because I did not put up a pre-order for that one, and I just know it's a crazy, insane summer. The other thing as well, and this is an important aspect for releasing One Hand Screaming 20 Haunting Years, releasing that independently, but trying to do it like a traditional title. Meaning, I have it in a warehouse in Canada. I had to get the data to them 7 months ago. And I need to book my things with libraries and bookstores now in July for October, which is very unlike what indie authors typically do. It's like, oh, the book's done. I got it back from my editor. I'm hitting publish now. And so this is just a weird thing. And particularly because I'm a procrastinator, it's different. Now, when I'm working with a publisher and the publisher is responsible for all of that stuff and getting it out in the bookstores and stuff like that, and oftentimes the publicist helps with the bookings for book signings and things like that, at least in the first couple weeks of the book's release. That's a great position for me to be in, because all I have to worry about is getting the manuscript to my editor by the deadline and then turning it around back and forth several times as we continue to edit it. In the indie world, that timeline significantly shrunk down. And so it's even though I've been indie publishing for 20 years, yes, 20 years, come October was my first self-published book, which is why I'm so excited about this One Hand Screaming anniversary edition, 20th anniversary edition, is that you'd think I would have learned in 2 decades. But anyways, a lot going on. Next week's episode, I am not sure what it's going to be. I'm going to be probably on the road. I do know on the 26th, because that coincides with the release date for Rick Hibson, a nonfiction book on, again, a nonfiction writer. This will be on writing reviews and making a living interviewing authors and reviews and stuff like that. So he has a new book coming out on that, which we'll be releasing on July 26th. So I figure that's the perfect time to do that episode. I interviewed Rick. There will also be, of course, a special thing. So I had a chat with Rick where I wanted to pitch something to him based on what he does. And I thought it would be a great thing to do to have you guys watch my pitch so you can learn from all the things I do wrong, which you can just kind of learn by seeing an actual live pitch in action. And that'll be available over with the patrons. I'll have that in the audio feed for patrons, and of course we'll send that over to those folks who are jumped out of Patreon and jumped onto Buy Me a Coffee, because that was a better way for them to want to support it. So anyways, that is it for this rambling introductory matter and personal update. Now it's time to get to this fantastic conversation with Becca Syme. Becca, welcome to the Stark Reflections podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
I am so thrilled and embarrassed that I haven't been brave enough to ask you to come on my podcast before today, or not today, when I asked you a month ago. And I have to apologize. So this is going to be us being like completely peeling back and showing behind the scenes, but I just screwed up majorly because I was working on editing another podcast, thought I got 2 hours between when I have to interview Becca, and then I lost track of time. And I looked up, I went to my email because I was going to look up something else. And I saw that you were in the waiting room for 20 minutes. You were in the waiting room. So I jumped into Zoom, like I screamed, the dog ran out of the room. I jumped up and there you were, smiling patiently. So, but there's a strategy you have, and I want to share that because I think it's very valuable.
Yeah, I was telling Mark when we were talking that like I've had experiences before where something actually did come up, like an emergency for somebody, and it's happened often enough that I've done it that I now just work, right? So like I always have either my inbox ready to work on, or like I'm working on edits for a book, and so I'll just pull the book up really quickly and do, something I know I can get interrupted in the middle of, because it's just like, making sure that commas got moved or nothing I have to really think about. But I just kind of learned that we were talking about how we share a strength called a ranger. So
we share that strength?
Yeah, we share a strength. We both have a ranger. I mean, I think we have more than one strength in common, but that one in particular is like wanting to use time efficiently and be as effective as possible. So I will often schedule myself very tightly during the day, but then it means like my emails don't get answered quick enough or something. So anytime I have 5 minutes, I will just go do something quickly that I know I can be interrupted, because it never bothers me to wait, because I'm always ready with other work, assuming that when people show up, they'll show up, and I'll just work until they get there. And then it does, like Mark was saying, it makes me less frustrated with the waiting, because I don't notice that I'm waiting. So it mostly just makes it easier when people, if something did happen, like if you had been in the ER and I had been sitting here for an hour and a half waiting on the call, I wouldn't have known, right? And so it does no good for me to be stressed out about someone not showing up for a call when it does commonly happen that people are in emergencies or they forget things, and they shouldn't have to feel guilty about forgetting things. I should be a good manager of my own emotions and expectations. So I just always have work ready.
Oh, I love that. I love that. And so I'm so thrilled to have you on the podcast. Just talking to you makes me feel smarter in general. But listening to you, because when you were at I have the notes here, at the Toronto Indie Author Conference in early May of 2024. I actually took probably 7 or 8 pages of notes from two of the talks that you did, which were just absolutely amazing. But so for for people who aren't familiar with Becca Syme,
Mhm.
shame on me for not having you on before, but shame on, no shame, no
No
shame.
shame,
If you
no
don't know who
shame.
Becca Syme
Yeah.
is, oh my goodness, you're in for a gosh darn treat today. But we were talking about strengths. So this is the Clifton Strengths. Can you explain
Mhm.
a little bit about the strengths, why that's important, and even just you with your strengths, and I guess how it fits so beautifully with what you do to help writers, and you write and you help us in many different ways.
Yeah, I really like the strengths as a personality metric because I think a lot of personality metrics are um I've decided there's 4 types of people. And so now I'm dividing people up into what I've observed, right? As
Right.
what my decision was. And the way that the strengths were designed and found really was there was a researcher who was like, I think people are really different. And I want to interview a bunch of people and find out how they're successful and see if a pattern emerges in the data
Right.
about how people are so different. And so they really approach the experiment with only the assumption that there has to be a pattern here somewhere. And we're willing to work at this research, especially interviewing and coding interview research, until we figure out what the pattern is and just see if it's easy to figure out. And
Right.
so what they did was they interviewed, hundreds of thousands of people over the course of a decade. And they were trying to understand how are the most successful people in the world successful. And they just kept interviewing and coding until they found this very clear pattern in the data, which was when you have all 9 of these traits that all are related to each other, you tend to have all of them, right? So like if you have 6 of them, you have 9 of them, or if you have 9 of them, you have 12 of them, and they all occur together and they tend to be like exceptionally strong. And so they just coded all those behaviors. They called them a strength, right? And then they figured out there's 34 different strengths that could possibly have existed. And then when you take the test, you get an order of those 34. So of all the things that humans could be incredible at, really like outstanding, incredible, here are the ones that you have that are the top. So your top 5, and Mark has empathy and arranger and ideation and belief. And so like Mark has a specific top 5 and I have input and connectedness and strategic, right? So these all have names, but what the names represent is a set of behaviors that we can count on you to have. So the wording that Gallup uses is near perfect, right? So where we can expect near perfect, consistent behavior. And so the goal is essentially to understand where do I fall in these traits? Which ones do I have that are the strongest? And then because they're so consistent across languages and, cultures and genders, like because they're so consistent, then how do I utilize these things that are the best about me to the best that I possibly can? And that's where strengths kind of came from. And then we just translate them for writers, basically.
And you do, so once somebody's taken a test like that, you actually do more curated, not therapy. I was going to say therapy. You do more
It is a
it,
little
it
bit
is
like
it is yeah.
therapy.
But I was
Hmm.
going to say, but you curated coaching and
Hmm.
mentoring and therapy
Hmm.
to help writers, because sometimes some writers feel I'm horrible, I can't do this. It's like no, 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 no. You're just not leveraging your strengths properly, right?
Yep.
It's
Hmm.
usually that case, right?
Yep. Yeah. Or like just, which is the case a lot with like a strength like empathy, for instance, which Mark has. Like empathy people can know what everyone's feeling all the time. So they tend to be able to treat people as though they're feeling the thing that they're really feeling. And that comes with some really amazing upsides, especially as writers, right? Being able to understand the depth of human emotion and communicate the depth of human emotion, a huge upside. But then it also has the downside of when people around me are not okay, I'm not okay.
Yeah.
Or when there's a lot of emotion coming at me all at one time, like it can be really overwhelming. or sometimes empathy people can struggle to figure out which feelings are my feelings and which feelings are somebody else's, right? Like there's all these things that you can kind of count on empathy to do, which are when you take into account the way that writers have to function. Like if I'm a fiction writer and I'm writing emotive scenes, it's common for high empathy people to stall out when they get to the really hard stuff in the book. Like they have a really hard time putting their characters through emotional paces
Right.
because they're going to feel those feelings writing that scene with those characters as though they're sitting in the room with the people, the real people. So knowing that as a high empathy person, it's like, well, I know those feelings are real. I know that they're not going to go away if I don't finish writing them.
Right.
So let me clear the decks, get all the external stability in motion, and then sit down and get through this as quickly as possible so I can get them to their resolution. But a
Right.
lot of empathy people instead will just not open the book, right? Because it's like,
Right.
oh, this is gonna suck. It's gonna be so hard. Or they'll get stuck and not know why. And then I'll ask, like, well, are you right before the black moment? And they're like, yeah, how do you know that? And that's just how empathy works sometimes, right? Like it's just so consistent.
Yeah. Wow. And it also, I think the other thing is, with a book I finished earlier this year, I remember spending half the day after writing a particularly difficult scene for a character. Yeah, I was like, no wonder I was feeling out of
Yeah.
sorts. It
Yep.
was kind of like, wow, I'm just by myself here, but this is a thing that's happening. Wow, that's an amazing.
Yeah, and they have emotions have residue. So
Yeah.
like when you feel these big giant emotions and then you go try to interact with people, you're going to feel as though you've just been through that, experience with someone because you have. As an
Yeah.
empathy, the emotions are not false just because they're fiction. They're true,
Right.
right? And we feel them as though they're true when we're high empathy. And so just knowing how that works, then it helps me to be a better decision maker in my writing career. It helps me to manage my relationships with other people in my life better. It helps me to know why staying off the internet is good for me, why not being on Facebook is good for me, not swimming around in everybody else's emotions all the time when I
Right.
don't have to is good for me. So like it's powerful.
Did you, when you obviously saw a need in the industry that authors needed this support and this help. Was it after looking at your top five, and is that where you're like, I think I can do this. I think this is the right thing for me to help other
Oh,
writers. Like,
like
was that part of that, or was it just more, did it happen in a different way?
I think it was so organic I almost didn't notice it.
Really?
Because I had been I'm one of those people because of my personality, I get really obsessed with figuring out how something works once I get interested in it, right?
Okay.
So like I first took the strengths test in 2005 and immediately was like, I need to get certified. I need to figure all this out. I need to, like, I got to do this. So I started coaching people and trying to understand the strengths and learn more about them. And then I had all of this experience by the time I got into the writing career where I had already been coaching people and doing strengths and stuff. And so what would end up happening was like my friends in their indie world, right? In the beginnings of indie publishing were running these businesses, and they'd be like, why can I not fire people? Or like, why is this person able to take advantage of me? And I'd look at their strengths and I'd be like, oh, because da da da. Right. And it's just like I can spend 45 minutes with somebody and know them better than people who've known them for 20 years just
Hmm.
because the shorthand of the strengths are so predictive in how they work, especially combinate certain combinations of strengths. So like I could help people solve their problems very quickly without needing to spend a lot of time getting to know them. And so it just kind of happened where, I would help people and then go about my business as a writer because I was a writer. And then Margie Lawson asked me to teach a class for her on her platform. And that was when it really started, was that I would sit down with indie authors and try and help them understand, like, how do I run a better business? This is like 2013, 14-ish,
Yeah.
era. And by the time it got to spread around a little bit, I was teaching it maybe twice a year. And then I started having to teach it like every other month. And then it was like, oh, this is like, I better start, answering the demand a little bit. I got an assistant but yeah, it happened so organically. I didn't even realize that it was happening until it had already happened. And then it just kind of took over my life, which was great because I'm a writer. So I like being in this industry. I want everybody to be okay. But that was really kind of where it started, was like I had this ability because I'd coached just so many people before I started in writing because I needed to understand it. So by the time the writers came along and needed help, I had all of this knowledge already that I could just kind of say, well, I can help you with that. Like that's, easy for me. It was fun for me to help people figure out how to run their business better. And then it just kind of became a thing I do, I guess.
as well. And so how many, I mean, you've got the sort of the question, the premise brand of books for authors.
Yeah.
How many, I mean, I think I lost count. Did you lose count yet of how many different titles that you've put out?
I think I have 7 out, and then the eighth one we just kickstarted. So that's the book I'm trying to finish editing currently. So I think there's 8 nonfiction books out. And then I have 2 more that I'm slated to write this year, but I don't know if I'm going to get to
Two
them,
more,
but we'll
wow.
see.
And so the
Yeah.
first one was Dear Writer, You Need to Quit. That was the
Yeah.
very first one, right? And it
Yeah.
sounds mean,
It
but
does.
it's not, right?
Yeah. It's very like, I would love for you to keep writing. So you need to quit all these other things
Right.
in order to be able to keep writing. And it kind of became a running joke where I heard an author from stage at a very big conference once reference people shouldn't quit. And even though there's this big popular book out there that tells you should quit, you shouldn't quit. And I was like, oh, but you haven't read it though,
Yeah, yeah.
because
You're
like
judging it
I
by the
literally
title.
say on the first page, please don't quit writing
Yes.
though.
Yeah. Yeah, but you need to quit doing this thing
Everything
that's gonna
else.
hurt your writing. Yeah, no, I love
Yeah.
love that as well. So
Yeah.
you're doing the audiobook with the new release as well, or how's that?
Yeah, I haven't done a ton of audio since I moved. I moved from Montana to Minnesota, and my new place is not set up as easily for
Right.
recording. So I'm still trying to find kind of the best
Yeah.
practice for the audio. And everybody keeps saying only 3 of them are in audio, and I still have 5 more to do. And I'm like, I just can't find a space here. So I may have to go to a studio and have it done.
Yeah.
But there's just too much noise. Like there's too much ambient
Yep.
noise where I live right now. So
No,
we'll
I
see.
know. People in my neighborhood decide they're going to mow their lawn. So even with the windows,
Yes.
I mean, I had to do for an audiobook or author's notes and stuff like that. I had blankets and sheets and everything like in here because when Liz redid my office, the bookshelves don't go all the way to the wall anymore. So I don't have the same. So I have to hang thick blankets and
Yeah,
sheets
like
and
for
stuff
sound
to
canceling.
muffle the sound. And it
Yeah.
takes like 15 minutes
It
to set
takes a
up.
while.
And then, of
Yeah.
course, then the dog has gas or
Right.
whatever, right? And he's just sleeping right beside me or he's
Yeah.
snoring. Like, dude, come on. So
Yeah.
a studio sounds nice, actually.
I know. It'd be
I
so
mean,
great.
so one thing I know about myself, and maybe this is a trait that we can talk about, but you get into the studio, you're paying for the studio, you book the time, therefore your business. Get in, get her done.
Yep.
When I'm struggling sometimes with writing because I work from home,
Yeah.
is sometimes I'll go to a library
Yep.
and I'll sit there and I'll open the laptop and I'll do whatever. And I've had a coffee. So I know I've only got 20 minutes before I have to get up and then I might lose my spot and go to the washroom. So it's like that 20 minutes better work. And
Yep.
every single time,
Yeah.
I'm way more productive when I
Oh, yeah.
limit my time like that.
Yep. So many of us are. We were talking about like Mark has some strengths that are very pressure prompted. And a lot of us who have pressure prompted strengths where we are not internally motivated to get work done, we're externally motivated to get work done. And when that
Right.
happens, rather than trying to figure out how to motivate myself more, I need to assume that I'm pressure prompted and treat myself as though I'm pressure prompted. So a lot of us need to not work from home because working from home is too comfortable of an environment. There isn't enough pressure associated
Right.
with it. So we need to be somewhere where there's pressure associated. Or some of us who are very pressure prompted, who work from home, will do the chores or take care of the family or mow the lawn because those things have instinctive pressure associated. And when we see them, I'm like, oh, the lawn needs to be mowed. Let me go do that really quick. Instead of, nope, the book needs to be written. So let me
Right.
open the book. But if I can't see the lawn, I'm more likely to open the book. So when I know that about myself, then I treat myself like I joke with clients where I'm like, if I was your CEO, this is how I would manage you. Like, I don't want you to be uncomfortable. I want you to be happy and productive. So I would take this away, right? Like, no Facebook.
Yeah.
And I would make you hire an assistant and I would make you work in the office, not in your house. You may think you want to work in your house, but what you really want is to be home more. So let's make you work outside the house, couple hours, do the things that need to be done, and then just come back home and don't work as much. Like, it's fine. You can be at home more. You don't have to work 8 hours in the office. But if I was your CEO, this is what I would do to manage how you work. I wouldn't assume that you should be different from how you are. I would assume you are who you are. And then I would motivate you and move your environment around you so that it would help you get done what you want to get done. But so many of us are like, oh, I have this office. I better use it. Or, oh, we spent all of this money painting or redecorating, or, oh, I bought this desktop computer. I better use it. It's like, I would rather you work on your phone in the coffee shop than at home on your desktop because you're more productive in the coffee shop on your phone than you are at home on your desktop.
Interesting. Just like the little insights
Yep.
that make a huge, huge difference.
Yeah.
So
Yep.
what are the dangers potentially then of, I guess, not recognizing those things? I mean, apart from you're just going to keep struggling.
Yeah. I mean, some of it is, and I think the hardest truth about human nature is that you can't have perspective on yourself. Like, you can have perspective on anyone else, but you can't have perspective on yourself. So most of what we believe is true about ourselves is based on learning that happened to us before we had a prefrontal cortex, right? So things that our environment taught us about life that happened before we actually knew how to process data. And the downside of that is most of it's wrong. Like, most of what you believe about yourself, most of what you're afraid of, most of what you think is actually just flat out wrong. It's your brain trying to make the best sense out of data that didn't make sense because you didn't have the ability to process it. So, like, we have a friend group that disintegrates when we're in sixth grade, and we've learned that we're not likable because our friend group disintegrated. Because the easiest way to explain why my friend group disintegrated was to take responsibility for it. So then I start to believe that I'm not likable, even though I'm one of the most likable people you will ever meet. But I believe that in my head because I've always believed it and I've never questioned it. And
Hmm.
I did not have the ability to have perspective on myself when I was in sixth grade. So I learned something that wasn't true, but now I base my whole identity on that thing. So the downside is most of us are basing our identity on things that are just flat out not true. We're
Right.
believing that we're incompetent when we are. We're thinking that we have to do things we don't need to do. We're being self-critical when we don't need to be self-critical, but we don't have any perspective on ourselves. So what coaching does is it says, hey, you know, that way that you can read everybody's emotions all the time, that's not a weakness. That's actually a strength. And here's how we know it is, because statistically speaking, some of the greatest people in the world have had that. And that's how it got identified in the Strengths Finder. And so here's how you can use it to feel more in control and more productive and less at the mercy, right, of the empathy. And instead of saying, oh, I care too much about what people think about me or about other people, or I'm nosy or whatever, right? Like, whatever story I'm telling myself is true about me, is actually just not true.
Right.
But we didn't know it wasn't true when we learned it, so we still keep believing it. And I think that's the key for me with how to work with any adult human
Yeah.
in general, but specifically with writers, is that most of us are believing things about ourselves and basing our identity on things that aren't true.
Right.
And so they need someone to come in and speak a little bit of truth and tell them a different story about themselves.
It's amazing. I'm reflecting on my childhood, and I'm reflecting on the
Hmm.
fact that I was quiet, I was shy, I sat in the
Yeah.
corner, didn't say anything. And that was my self-perception because my parents said, "You're shy and you're quiet." I remember my mom seeing a video of a talk I did as an adult. And she's like, who told you how to say those things? Like, where did that come from? Because she just see me as the quiet. And I for the longest time saw myself as the quiet, shy kid who didn't say anything.
Yeah.
And it was weird. It took a long time for me to break that.
Yeah.
I guess that self image of, no, Mark's quiet. He never says anything.
Right. But
So
when you have an audience who wants to hear what you're saying, when you have the kind of personality that you have, it changes, right? So,
yeah,
like when you have an audience that's unreceptive, somebody who's wired like you is not going to say anything
yeah,
because it's not welcome, right?
that's
Or
right. Of
mhm,
course, that makes
mhm,
sense. So of course there wasn't the right audience there,
it's not
right?
the right
They
audience.
didn't want to talk about craft beer and ghosts. No.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
Or or they didn't or they didn't think that a 10-year-old would have anything interesting to add,
Right. Yeah.
right? Or they thought you're reading all the time, so of course you just want to read all the time. Like, and this is the key about for me about our childhood is that it may have been perfectly benign stuff that happened.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
doesn't need to be big, huge, bad things that happen, although sometimes that happens as well. But sometimes I can learn the wrong lesson just from my parents asking me if that's really what I want to wear today, right?
Yes.
Like something that seems really helpful, something that seems like, hey, it's cold outside. Have you thought about that?
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, the more you ask me that now, the more I think I don't trust myself. And
Right.
now I need to know what everyone thinks about how I look all the time because that's what I learned what you need to do. Right. And so it can be something totally benign that no one meant to teach you the wrong thing about yourself. And that's just what happened. And it's really unfortunate because I think because we're all so internal in terms of like our vulnerable thoughts are internal, right? Because we're all so internal, we often don't share the things that we really think. So no one can question the premises of the thoughts
Yeah.
because we're not walking around being like, well, I guess nobody cares what I have to say. So I'm just not going to say anything. Nobody gets to question that because you never say it out loud. You just act it out, right?
Right. Yeah.
So no one can question it until you get to an age where, or into a place where you're around people who bring out your, inner performer, right? And then all of a sudden it's like, oh, now people want to hear what I have to say. So now I'm going to talk. And you didn't know you weren't. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. But it's like, oof.
yeah,
That
yeah,
explains it.
yeah, yeah,
Well, that's why I've always said I'm an omnivert
yeah,
because I tend to just kind of go with whatever the situation requires of
yeah,
me.
yeah,
Interesting.
yeah.
So I want to dig into questioning the premise
Mhm.
as a way of helping ourselves because there's so many assumptions we make as writers, so many assumptions we make as people in general. I mean, some of the things are, well, you have to write every day or something like that. And I know if your
Yep.
mind is wired differently, that's not going to work for you, right?
Nope.
So what's a good foundational way to remind yourself to question the premise because
Oh,
we just make the premises and we make an assumption. It's like, oh, it's noon, I have to eat. I'm not
yeah.
hungry, but I have
But
to
do
eat.
you?
Yeah.
Yeah. Are you hungry? Have you checked in?
Yeah.
Like the way that I treat question the premise, I guess, is the way that I treat everything. I've learned so much about human behavior and assumptions and psychology that I question everything. Like literally
Okay.
almost every thought that I have, almost every assumption that I make, The first time I hear myself say it at this point, it's like, okay, well, let's just question that. Because I know that an awful lot of the things that I believe because my survival depended on it at some point in my life. So, like, a lot of the things I believe are true about me, or the things I believe are true about the world, or whatever, like, at some point in my life, my survival depended on making a decision about that thing. And so at this point in my adult life, if I haven't questioned it yet, I just question it automatically to the point where, so like I'm an intuitive writer, and I would love nothing more than just to be able to outline and write a book that's any good when I outline, because it would be so much easier and so much more logical, I think, right? I think that it would be so much easier. But when I write according to outline, no matter how many different ways and kinds I've tried, it does not work for me. So then I'm like, okay, might there be another reason other than I'm just stupid? Like, because I know that's a premise that I believe because of reasons that I know is not true. But it turns out there are a whole bunch of people out there who just write according to their intuition. So then I'm like, oh, let me figure out how that works. So then I do a deep dive on how that works. And now I understand intuition in a way that allows me to basically say to almost any person, there's a good likelihood that if you don't take to that thing, there's a reason that you shouldn't be doing it. And there's a reason you should try to do something else. So, like, if my instinctive response to something is, I don't like Facebook ads, I'm not going to run Facebook ads. And then I go and take all the Facebook ads classes, still can't make them work, try to help myself figure out how to do them, still can't make it work. It's like, no, I knew intuitive before I even started running Facebook ads that they were not for me. And then I wasted all this time and money trying to make myself do them. And now I just trust my intuition. Now
Hmm.
I just don't, because I know how my brain works. But again, not everybody's there.
Right.
So not everybody can just auto QTP everything, but I would definitely start with the stuff that is everyone says this. 100% of the things that absolutely everyone says are not for everyone. And the more emphatic they are that it does apply to everyone, the more they are lying to themselves or to you, because most people are not lying to you. Most people are lying to themselves, or
Right.
they just don't understand the breadth of human experience or expression. They don't know the world well enough to know that, oh, wait, there's a reason why some people shouldn't write every day. Oh, wait, there's a reason why some people shouldn't outline and still are able to produce good stories and still are able to finish books. There's a reason why people should edit as they go. There's a reason, like all of these things. There's a reason why some people should never, ever look at a spreadsheet with numbers for their ads for their entire lifetime. Ever. Some of you should not even be listening to people who tell you you have to look at. But the problem is the people who say these things are so certain, they are so certain that they're right, that when I feel any level of uncertainty, especially if I'm have any empathy whatsoever, where I can feel how certain someone is and I can feel how uncertain I am, then I want to solve that uncertainty by just believing whatever they say. Like, well, I better learn how to do this. I have to teach myself how to read spreadsheets. No, you don't. No, you don't. There are intuitive ad runners out there who literally just go by feelings and bad shrimp, and they just look at their numbers and they make choices and they are fine and they make money and they make plenty of money.
Yeah.
So it is not necessary to do any individual thing that anyone says you have to do, including, by the way, strengths,
Yeah.
including strengths. Not everyone should be doing strengths. It is not for everyone.
Yeah.
Not everyone should do Enneagram. Not everyone should do anything,
Yeah.
because nothing is for everyone. That's like the only 100% true rule.
I love that you question your own premises all the time.
Oh my God,
It's
all the
dynamic,
time.
right? You're
I
constantly evolving.
I question myself so often that, like, I feel like I'm constantly just, and frankly, if you never question yourself, that's a red flag.
Yeah.
that's a red flag for me. If you're like, I'm always right, I'm like, bye. Nope.
Yeah, no, that actually terrifies me.
Yeah.
The thought of not questioning.
No. You
It's like
question yourself. Yeah.
metacognition. I don't know. It's just one of those things. It's like, how could you not?
Yeah.
I'm not saying that we have to always doubt ourselves, but I'm just saying, but you're
No.
always looking at something and asking.
Yes. That's a good point. What I don't mean is that we can't ever be right about anything, right?
Yeah,
But what I mean is there's enough stuff that we believe that is absolutely certainly true that is pretty much just the luck of the draw when I was a kid.
yeah,
Like the change and that one change in a dynamic makes me think like a completely different person. And there's so much we now know about the way that neurons work and the way that neural pathways work and the way our brains work that we didn't know before,
yeah,
that it's like, no, we should be constantly changing and evolving. We should be constantly learning. And staying the same can be really dangerous because it often means that we're static.
yeah,
So, like, we're not taking new things in, we're not adapting, we're not learning. But also, there's nothing wrong with just not examining your thoughts.
yeah.
I'm fine with that.
Yeah, and it's almost like it's almost the same as like, no outlining and having a plan and a plot and stuff like that. No, I know what a good story is. I know the flow, and it's just going to happen.
Yep.
Dean Wesley Smith calls it writing into the dark. I think you
Yeah.
mentioned like
Hmm.
intuitive writing,
Hmm.
stuff like that. I love it. Yeah, again, there's not everything's for everyone. So as
Yeah.
we get closer to the end of this conversation, and I don't want it to ever end because I always have so much fun when we talk when we chat, and I get to record it this time.
Yeah.
Is if I can ask, so you
Yeah.
shared a really great game when you were at Toronto Indie Author Conference in May. You shared a game, and ever since you shared that game, I play it all the time when I'm in public, and I'm very consciously aware of it, and I have so much fun. And you remember the game when you were at the airport? You were talking
Watching
about
people. Uh-huh.
watching people.
Can you
Would you be
count
able
to
to?
30?
Yeah.
Yeah. Have you managed to count to 30?
No, never.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, when I'm
Yeah.
by myself and there's no one else around, sure, I can hit 100.
Well, yeah, I can hit 30, but I watch other people, right? That's and
Oh, that's what, like it's yeah, watching people getting
I
it.
do try with myself. The game that Mark is referencing is I try to make it long, like longer and longer and longer before I reach for my phone because I know the way that my brain wants to fill space, it gets uncomfortable with space, so it wants me to do something, and the easiest and fastest way to do that is to reach for my phone. But the game I play when I'm on the plane is, can I just not reach for it, right? Like, is it
Right.
possible? But I also watch people, right? Like, I'll be standing around watching people and I'll be counting and watching, like, are you going to be able to make it past 30 seconds before you reach for your phone? And the goal is when they are unattached to anything, right? So they're not having a conversation with anybody. They're just standing there. How long can they make it before they reach for their phone? And I will challenge you to find a person that you can make it to 30 before they'll reach for their phone. And they just like
Yeah.
they just can't.
But I've conscious two things from that. I've consciously been aware of myself doing it more.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean I'm perfect at
No.
stopping it. But I think the exercise for me is allowing myself to disconnect. I got into a lot of Thoreau and walking in nature and doing like I don't know if you've heard of the 12-hour walk,
Mm-mm.
where you go and this guy was an adventure guy. He didn't know what to do during the pandemic, so he came up with it's called the 12-hour walk, and you leave your house. And Liz and I did this last summer, at 6:30 in the morning, and you just no headphones, no phone, like no technology. And I mean, I had a backpack with lunch and a change of clothes and stuff, and you just go walking for 12 hours. You don't have to walk the whole time, but you go out and you go somewhere and you just walk for 12 hours. And again, you can sit and whatever, however long you want. And then 12 hours later, you come back, you completely disconnected. And it was one of the most magnificent introspective moments in my life where I was just in my own head. I cried, I bawled.
Yeah.
I'm walking down a path and I'm singing songs to myself in my head. And the minute I come up with Cats in the Cradle, I'm like, ugly crying, just, and then, I mean, I think 45 minutes into it, I came up with the thesis project for the master's in publishing program. And that's when I went, I know what it's going to be, after I'd been struggling for weeks and weeks on, do I do this? Do I do this? Do I do this? And then it all just came clear.
Yeah.
I mean,
Because you
that
had space.
I had space. So that's what that exercise is, when is giving yourself that space.
Yeah. And it is specifically breaking the control that the phone has over our attention that we just don't recognize. Like,
Yeah.
I'm totally going to do the 12-hour walk now, and then I will tell you how it goes. But even just like, I started dating somebody who is very unattached to their phone, which has been super fascinating. Like,
Wow, yeah, that's rare.
it is so rare. And I mean, not that there's no, I mean, obviously, like, we text and stuff like that, but like,
Yeah.
there just is this feeling of like, I mean, there can be hours that pass when we're hanging out or out doing something, and like not even a pickup of the phone at one time. So I've started just leaving my phone and like leaving my phone in my purse and being completely disconnected. And it's been so different. So it makes me want to do the 12-hour walk in particular, because so there's a strength called intellection. And this can happen with ideation, which I know you have as well. It can happen with some of the other strategic thinking strengths, where your brain is so much the seat of all of this activity for the strategic thinking strengths, but it's so cluttered all the time, right? And so with intellection in particular, being disconnected from digital devices helps you to have the presence for the turning to happen, right? Where
Yeah.
I'm thinking over. And what happens with intellection is the more you think over something, the deeper you understand it. So it's like a progressive kind of thinking,
Yeah.
as opposed to like not making progress, I guess, maybe.
Yeah.
But we have such shallow thinking when we're really attached to digital devices, because we keep interrupting the thought cycle.
Right.
So, like, if the thought cycle takes you 30 minutes to get through, and you just are not aware that it takes you 30 minutes, and the longest that most of us last without our phones is 30 seconds, like, we're never really letting ourselves get all the way through the thought cycle and all the way to the bottom of this kind of like cognitive process that we have, that we should be taking advantage of.
Right.
And so many of us need to spend so much less time digitally connected. And I think the more we head into the future of technology, the more people are going to find that technology is creating a lot of angst for us,
Right.
and the more we'll feel more connected and more kind of magical if we can get away from that expectation that you have to be digitally connected all the time, and that we be more naturally connected, more physically, more emotionally connected. I think it's going to end up being better for us as a human race if we can get more into that space and get away from so much of the technological digital connection that we've got right now.
Yeah. Awesome. Um, yeah, I'll send you details about the 12-hour walk, and
Please do.
I
I would
love your
love to see
insights
that.
into that. Now, the one thing I did do is, Liz and I both had our phones on. They were in airplane mode,
Oh, I like
and
that.
because we had mapped out, because to go walk 6 hours, it mapped out a route, and I
Oh,
wanted to make
nice.
sure, okay, when am I going to get back, right? And it was
Oh, yeah.
painful, but again,
Yeah.
so you could at least know where you were on the map, and if an emergency happened, you had a way of,
Yeah.
because Liz has no sense of direction either, and she did actually walk through burn a grass that burned her, like these weeds that burned her legs, and then she got lost a shoe in the mud when she was trying to cross a river.
Oh, no.
I mean, she got it back, but I was kind of like, oh my God, I'm surprised you survived. So,
You did
I
not intend
insisted.
for it to be
Yeah.
survivalist.
No, it's
That
not.
was
No,
not the
no. And so I
intention.
did insist. I insisted that we had, and then we had each other, because on Do Not Disturb, you can have exceptions.
Right.
So my kid is always an exception when I'm on Do Not
Yeah.
Disturb. If my kid calls, or in that case with Liz called, I would accept the call because it was an emergency. We weren't going to just go,
Totally.
oh look, I saw a bird or
Yeah.
whatever. So, anyways, I'll send you details. But
Yeah,
so
please do.
Now, ironically, so for people who want to connect with you or want to find stuff of you online and check out your books and all of the amazing stuff that you do, where's the best place that people can find you?
I would probably do YouTube first, just because there's so much content there, and the Quitcast, QUITCAST is the YouTube channel. I mean, you could search for my name because that'll come up, but I would definitely check out, especially if you resonated with the intuitive stuff that we were discussing. I have a couple of different playlists that are just for intuitive writers, and I would check those out. But yeah, the YouTube channel is the easiest place. It's all free content. So
And it is
yeah.
absolutely amazing
Thank
stuff.
you.
Becca, thank you so much for what you do for us.
Yeah.
Appreciate that.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Well, if you thought my pre-interview matter for this episode was long and rambling, I'm having trouble narrowing down the reflections as I was listening back to this episode. So I think it was only in early June, that I had this conversation with Becca. And there's a few things, so many things. I'm going to try to be quick. We all laugh when I say that. But the way the interview opens and how Becca just rolled with it and leveraged, okay, Mark's light, I'm just going to work. And again, not being frustrated that she lost the time, because she pre-built stuff to do in case there was a delay, which is a phenomenal strategy and something I want to learn from. Then there was the whole idea of the home office and whether or not a home office is good for you. And I think questioning that was a really important aspect. And even though I love my home office, I often wonder, maybe there are certain tasks and certain jobs I should be doing outside of the office. So that's something I'm going to examine in the next little while. The next thing, this is a bigger one, it's the mind-blowing revelation of somebody who is wired like me and a high empathy person, and how growing up, I just never, I was a shy, quiet person, and it was always that way in my family. Family gatherings, it didn't matter. I was just the quiet person who never said anything, and that just kept getting reinforced and reinforced and reinforced. But this is what blew my mind. And again, this is not a traumatic thing. It's not. It's like it's a benign thing, like Becca says. It's not that there was anything horrible. I had a phenomenal childhood, a fantastic childhood, very privileged childhood. But, and my best friend Steve recognized this in me when he saw me interacting with my birth family a couple of years ago. The first time he'd ever seen me interacting with a couple of my siblings, as well as my birth mother. And he recognized there was a difference in the way I interacted. And I think it had to do with a high empathy person is not going to say anything when they're in front of an audience that isn't going to be receptive to what they have to say. I'm not saying I wasn't loved. I'm not saying any of that stuff. It's just that there were many ways I was not as comfortable speaking about things in that environment that I grew up in. Maybe because everyone else in the family was either an outdoors person or was somebody who was very much into sports and hunting and fishing, and I did kind of like doing stuff outdoors, but not really a hunter or fisherman or whatever. And or even I did play hockey, but I was never as aggressive as my cousins were. And so in that environment, I just stepped back and thought, well, nobody really wants to hear me talk about how much I love Spider-Man, and nobody wants to hear me talk about how much I love making up stories and creating imaginary characters and stuff like that. So I shut up. And again, I'm not saying that because I was abused or anything in that way. I always felt loved and accepted, but it was interesting because there were specific moments in my life. I remember a novel I have not yet published still, which was a novel that was really a novel I wrote about my love for my dad. And I remember him reading a section because it was kind of, parts of it were based on some of his life. And I remember when we were hunting, my cousin Rodney and my dad were hunting, and I was there with them, hanging out, writing, actually working, and we had power generator, so I had laptop power for like 8 hours. I was working on that novel, and I had some printouts of some of the scenes, and I wanted my dad to read it because I wanted to make sure I got it right, because it was something written from his point of view of being in a massive motorcycle accident when he was 20 years old. And I based it on a court document he had, so I based that whatever detail. And I just remember at one point in time, I still have a picture of my dad reading the story, and then us having a really, really insightful, meaningful conversation. And he told me how proud he was of me. And that was the first time we had connected in my territory of writing and storytelling, as opposed to connecting in the hunting and fishing realm, or even woodworking. We did woodworking together, and I did projects with him, which was phenomenal. I absolutely love those because that was us building stuff together. That was amazing. But anyways, it was those moments, those rare moments, where I actually was a speaker and not a quiet person who didn't say anything. And I recognize that about myself now in particular situations where, why am I quiet? Oh, because I don't think I have anything of value to give these people. I'm just going to shut up. So anyways, that's a long reflection, but it was mind-blowing and very therapeutic. And I just appreciate that Becca helped me with that, because it's going to help me in a lot of other situations going forward. There's other things like the intuitive writer versus outlining, and just accepting it. And I think I have come to terms with the fact that I don't outline. I'm an intuitive writer, or whatever term you want to use for it. I just prefer discovery writing, that sort of thing. And then even other things, and this is another thing that I think is important for you. I'd love you to think about and reflect on this, is the concept of trusting your intuition. And Becca used the example of Facebook ads. You know, the intuitive or the instinctive thoughts where I'm no good at Facebook ads, and then you spend a lot of time, a lot of energy, and you realize I'm not good at Facebook ads, and I just wasted a lot of money and time learning something that I already knew. Sometimes trusting your intuition is okay, because there's probably a reason why. Now this probably comes from the fact that, let me see, is it belief? No, it's connectedness. I have one of my strengths. My second highest strength is connectedness. You have faith in the links among all things. I do believe that things are linked together. And sometimes when you get that feeling, there's a reason you get that feeling. Listen to yourself. There's something core inside that's probably worth listening to. And then the last thing, and I think this, either whether it's metacognition or thinking about thinking, or whether it's just in life in general, someone who never ever questions themselves, never guesses, like, could there be a different way? Could there be? That, Becca said, is a major red flag. And it reminded me that there are situations where that's probably what made me uncomfortable. I do love getting into in-depth conversations and questioning and exploring and learning. And I'm starting to recognize that in certain situations, when I'm engaging with somebody who never questions himself, that makes me extremely uncomfortable. And now I think I understand why. Because I'm feeling that as a high empathy person, and that doesn't sit right with me, because it doesn't make sense to me, and a major conflict happens, and that's where I get a lot of anxiety. So just, again, look at me. I'm going through therapy again just by thinking about several of the things that Becca said in the interview. How about you? What were you thinking? What were some of your reflections? What were some of the things you questioned about the conversation that you just heard with Becca? I'd love to hear your comments. You know how to get a hold of me. You can email me, mark@markleslie.ca. Leave a comment over at starkreflections.ca or the various social medias. I love to hear what you're thinking about, what you're reflecting on, what you're questioning as you're listening to the podcast. But thank you so much for listening. I really appreciate having you. I really appreciate getting a chance to spend some time in your ear canal, maybe potentially in your brain. But thanks for having me with you this week. I will be back next week in the next episode. So until next week and until the next episode, this is Mark Leslie Lefebvre wishing you great writing and good Stark Reflections.
Thank you for listening to the Stark Reflections podcast. You can find show notes for each episode at starkreflections.ca.
The music for this podcast, Laser Groove, was composed and produced by Kevin MacLeod. Check out more of Kevin's great music at incomptech.com.